When you picture a Viking, you probably imagine a wild warrior in a horned helmet charging into battle, axes swinging, and ships burning behind him. But here's the truth: Vikings never wore horned helmets. Not once. It's one of the biggest myths in history. Archaeologists have found actual Viking helmets, and every single one of them is simple, round, and built for protection. No horns, no spikes, nothing flashy. In fact, only one fully preserved Viking helmet has ever been found: the Yermanbu helmet, discovered in Norway in 1943. It's made of iron, has a rounded cap, and a simple nose guard, and that's it. No horns, no wings, nothing that would make it into a Hollywood costume department. The idea of Vikings wearing horned helmets is a modern invention. It began in the 19th century, when European artists romanticized ancient cultures. In 1876, costume designer Karl Emil Doppler created horned helmets for Richard Wagner's opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen. The characters were based on Norse and Germanic mythology, not real Vikings, but the dramatic look caught on and was soon mistaken for history. Painters began adding horns to Viking artwork. Early films followed suit. Even schoolbooks and history illustrations repeated the image, cementing it in pop culture. By the early 1900s, the horned Viking had become so familiar that it felt like fact. In reality, Viking helmets were designed for protection and practicality. A horn design would have been unsafe. It could catch weapons or be grabbed during combat. Iron helmets were expensive, so only wealthier warriors likely owned them. Most others probably fought without metal helmets, using simpler head coverings or none at all. So if Vikings didn't have horned helmets, where did the idea come from? Long before the Viking Age, some ancient cultures did use horned headgear. The Viking helmets, discovered in Denmark in 1942, date to around 900 BC, during the Nordic Bronze Age. They feature large curved horns and were likely used for ceremonies or rituals, not warfare. These artifacts are far older than the Viking Age and not connected to Viking warriors. It's a classic case of history blending with imagination. Over time, myth replaced reality, and what began as stage costume ended up defining an entire culture's image. The real Vikings were explorers, traders, shipbuilders, and farmers, far more than the savage raiders we see on screen. They sailed from Scandinavia to North America hundreds of years before Columbus, built settlements, traded silk and silver, and left behind sagas that still shape our understanding of Norse culture today. They didn't need horns to be impressive. They already were. So next time you see a horned helmet, remember, it's not history, it's Hollywood. Unknown, but true. Einstein failing math? Yeah, that never happened. People love to say, don't worry, even Einstein failed math, but that's just not true. He was actually way ahead of his classmates, teaching himself algebra and geometry before most kids his age even started fractions. By 15, he'd already mastered calculus. So where did the myth come from? When Einstein's old school records were published, reporters saw low numbers on his grades and assumed they were bad. But in Switzerland at the time, a low number meant a good grade. 1 was the best, 6 was the worst. Someone flipped it by mistake, and the myth spread like wildfire. Einstein later laughed about it, saying, "I never failed mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." So next time you hear someone say Einstein failed math, just remember, the only thing that failed was the rumor. Ever wonder why it's called a sandwich? The story goes back to the 1700s, to one man, John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich. And, according to legend, one very long night at the gambling table, Montagu didn't want to stop his game for dinner, so he told his servants to bring him meat tucked between 2 slices of bread. No fork, no plates, just pure convenience. Other gamblers saw it and started saying, "I'll have the same as sandwich." And boom, the name stuck. Of course, people had been putting food between bread for centuries, but this moment gave it a name that would go global. By the time the Industrial Revolution hit, the sandwich had become the ultimate portable meal for workers everywhere. So next time you grab a BLT or a burger, you're honoring a man who just didn't want to leave the table. Unknown, but true. When winter comes and the ponds start to freeze over, most animals either migrate, hibernate, or die off. But turtles, They've got one of the strangest survival tricks in the animal kingdom. Some species can literally breathe through their butts. Okay, technically it's not exactly breathing and not quite the butt the way we think of it. Here's what's really going on. Freshwater turtles like the Australian Fitzroy River turtle and the North American painted turtle spend their winters underwater, often trapped beneath a sheet of ice. There's no access to the surface and they can't hold their breath for months. So how do they survive? They use a process called cloacal respiration. The cloaca is a multi-purpose opening on a turtle's rear end. It's used for excretion, laying eggs, and yes, gas exchange. Inside it are two special sacs called bursae, lined with thin, blood-rich tissue. When a turtle is underwater, it can pump water in and out of these sacs, absorbing oxygen directly through the membranes. It's basically an underwater lung system tucked into their behinds. This method is incredibly efficient. Some turtles can get up to 70% of their oxygen this way while hibernating. It allows them to stay submerged for weeks or even months in icy water, where their metabolism slows to a crawl. Their heart rate can drop to once every 10 minutes, and their body runs on minimal oxygen. But there's a limit. If oxygen levels in the water drop too low, the turtle's body switches to anaerobic respiration, a process that doesn't need oxygen but builds up lactic acid, kind of like when you sprint and your muscles start to burn. To survive, turtles release calcium from their shells to neutralize the acid. Their own shell literally helps balance their blood chemistry until spring arrives and they can surface again. It's weird, it's brilliant, and it's pure evolution at work. So next time someone says turtles are slow, remember, these little armored survivors can freeze in place, breathe through their rear ends, and live to see another summer. That's not slow, that's legendary. Unknown, but true. Let's say a magnetar, a dead star with a magnetic field a trillion times stronger than Earth's, started drifting our way. You wouldn't burn, you'd boil. The sky ignites, the oceans steam, and Earth turns to ash. But let's pretend the heat isn't the problem. Get within 600 miles and your brain short circuits. Thoughts glitch, muscles spasm. You're gone before you know it. Electronics fry, satellites drop. Reality gets weird. All from something that died millions of years ago. Magnetars, the dead stars that still kill. There's a giant cloud of alcohol floating in space, and it's massive, big enough to fill 400 trillion pints of beer. It's called Sagittarius B2, a molecular cloud near the center of our galaxy, about 390 light-years wide. Astronomers discovered it using radio telescopes, which detected the chemical signature of ethyl alcohol, the same type of alcohol found in drinks here on Earth. But before you imagine a cosmic brewery, there's a catch. It's mixed with toxic gases like ammonia and hydrogen cyanide, so you definitely couldn't drink it. What's wild is that clouds like this also contain complex organic molecules, the building blocks of life, suggesting that the chemistry behind life might be brewing all across the galaxy. So somewhere near the heart of the Milky Way, there's a cloud big enough to get every human on Earth drunk for eternity. Unknown, but true. Have you ever heard a recording of your own voice and thought, do I really sound like that? You do, and you don't. The reason lies in how sound travels and how your brain interprets it. When you speak, there are actually two different paths your voice takes to reach your ears. The first path is the one everyone else hears, air conduction. Your vocal cords vibrate, pushing sound waves through the air, and those waves hit the eardrum. The vibrations move through tiny bones in your middle ear to your inner ear, where they're turned into electrical signals your brain understands as sound. The second path is one only you experience, bone conduction. When you speak, your skull vibrates. Those vibrations travel through the bones of your head directly to the cochlea, the hearing organ inside your inner ear. Bone conduction carries more low-frequency sounds, which makes your voice seem richer and deeper inside your own head. But recordings don't use bone conduction. They capture only the air-conducted sound that everyone else hears. When you play it back, you're hearing your voice without that deeper resonance. To you, it sounds thinner, higher, and honestly, a little strange. Your brain has spent your entire life hearing your voice one way, from inside, so when you finally hear it from outside, it feels foreign, like listening to a stranger who just happens to sound a bit like you. The same principle is why bone conduction headphones work. They send sound through your skull directly to your inner ear, leaving your eardrums free to hear the world around you. So, do you really sound like that recording? Yes, that's what everyone else hears. The deeper voice you know is just an illusion created by your own bones. Unknown, but true. If you enjoyed this fun fact, please remember to hit like and subscribe. Thanks for watching Unknown But True.